Don't worry, we haven't done anything important yet. So anyway, at this point, I'm probably going to take this and move this back into the corner of the box so that you can sort of look into the room and the thing is in there. So in order to kind of make that easy for myself, it would be a good idea to take these wing objects that we made, and I'm going to put them on the boat layer for just one reason, and that is that when they're part of the boat layer, with any layer, and this is just like another cool thing about layers in Rhino, is that you can take this layer, right-click or double-press, and instead of changing things around, you can actually select all the objects on the layer. Excuse me, forgot about the music. So we're going to do excuse me, not like that. Really? So I'm going to go up here to select objects. Hang on just a second. I think something got shifted here. That is so interesting. Hang on just one quick second. Should be very easy. Interesting. Okay, well, that doesn't work anymore. So I'm just going to select them, and that wasn't too hard. Until probably my last update, they had a function that would allow you to select all objects on a layer. And I'm sure it probably still exists. It's just hidden somewhere. So anyway, I can take this object right now and drag it. So I'm going to choose to drag it in the top view. And I'm just going to kind of put it in this quadrant over here. It looks like I missed something in that selection, and it looks like it's not very important. It looks like it's a construction curve, so I'm just going to quickly stick that on the object layer here. And so now we're sort of looking back into this room. And really, what dictates sort of like the scale of your room is sort of how well you feel like the room sort of encompasses the object when you move the camera. So I'm having a little trouble zooming in right now. You may have encountered this before in Rhino. And one of the reasons I'm having a little trouble zooming in is because our origin is here, and our boat is all the way back here. So it's sort of like, I'm not sure if I can go any further. So there's a really awesome feature in Rhino. It's one of my favorite features in Rhino. So if you select something and you hit this little eyeglass with the yellow stuff inside, it will zoom to the selected thing. Now what's awesome about that is that it kind of reorients your viewport, but it also basically resets the orbit point to be 0, 0, wherever that object that you selected was. So that can be super, super helpful if you ever get lost in Rhino. And by get lost, I mean literally get lost. Like if you sort of can't, if you're scrolling back and forth and you're kind of moving back and forth, in a viewport and you can't find anything, it's probably because you're way out here in the world coordinates. And that can happen. So if that does happen, you can maybe do a select all and then hit this button and you're back home instantly. So that can be really helpful. A couple of things that I probably want to add. So as I was saying, as far as the room scale goes, I think right now I have my camera at a pretty comfortable distance from the object, and I can't see any sort of wall, right? So what some people, maybe don't appreciate as much is sort of seeing that, edge there. Now, you can assign backgrounds to the world. in Rhino in the render function. So that's an option if you're interested in that. But for most people, we're really looking for sort of like a closed interior view. And I'm just noticing a couple of things as I sort of look at what's going on with the boat. I'm noticing that it looks like, I'll show you in just a second, it looks like well, I can't see it when it's selected. It looks like it got kind of zhooshed down like a tiny bit, or maybe the room got zhooshed up, who knows? So I'm gonna, I think probably the easiest thing to do in this solution would just be to drag the room down a tiny bit. Now notice that these are all separate surfaces. So probably as you get to the point where, with your design, where you're sort of done like with the sort of modeling part, you might want to consider taking some of your objects, and we're going to do this very soon. You might want to consider taking some of your objects and making groups. So for example, with this room, we probably can group that pretty easily. So I'm going to pull that surface here, select that, basically select everything except for that. Oh. And of course, when you select the wrong thing, you have to kind of start over. So it's really just these three surfaces. So now I have them all, and I can make a group. Of course, in Rhino, the groups aren't super smart. You can't really edit inside a group. So if you want to edit something that's inside a group, you have to actually like ungroup it and then edit that specific thing and then regroup it. So that can be kind of annoying. But now that this is a group, of course, I can kind of like move it around, and I'm not being asked like which little surface that I want to take. I'm also just going to drag this down a tiny bit, and hopefully, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take the whole thing, and I'm going to move it a little bit closer to the origin point just for ease of working. And I think now we're probably ready to go. I'm going to like reorient this viewport. So I'll select one of these things and do that. And then over here, same thing. Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to push this down a tiny bit. One thing I might like to do right at this moment is probably take the room and just turn the room off. And one of the reasons why, somebody asked me last class, like why I work in layers. Well, what if I wanted to select all these items in the boat and they weren't on separate layers? Well, first of all, I'm just going to select them. Oh, that's totally not what I wanted, right? So if I do select them with this gone, then I can sort of freely select them, and there's no problem there. So I'm going to bring the room back. And it looks like I need to just kind of jump in a little bit here. Okay. Yeah, I think we're actually down here. That's why things look a little odd. And of course, there we go. Okay, so getting pretty close here. This looks just fine. So I'm pretty okay with that. Probably what I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to end up rotating this and kind of moving it into place. And I'm not going to get too into placement here because we have a couple of other things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to make something like, I'm basically going to make a whole new form here. So I'm going to turn the room, I'm going to keep the room on, but I'm going to lock it, which basically means that I could, again, like, reach through and sort of select these things, and they're not going to select the room. And I basically can't do anything to the room when it's locked. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a hexagon. So that would have 6 sides for this prompt. And it doesn't really matter where I put it so much right now. What matters is that it's sort of just there, because I can always move it later. So where I'm kind of going with this is I'd like to make a sort of column that's hexagonal, and then we're going to poke a bunch of holes in it, and then we're going to shine light through it. So this is sort of like a whole thing. But to get there, we basically have to make like a hexagonal column that has like a shell. So almost if you could imagine like a tube, basically. And that tube has some amount of thickness, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different. I mean, of course, we could sort of extrude this with extrude planar curve, which we're going to do. But usually the typical technique that I've shown you so far is to use the shell command. So I just want to show you like a different way of doing things, you know, not for any particular reason, just because there's lots of different ways to do things, and I want to show you a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically make the shell thickness with a curve rather than using the shell command. And this is a technique that is helpful if you're working with a little bit more irregular objects, or you want to have a shell that has more than one open surface. So I'm going to go ahead and now sort of common sense tells me, sure, I could just make another hexagon inside of this hexagon, right? That's something that can probably be done. I can find the center of this hexagon and then do that. There's actually an easier way to do that, and that's to go to the curve menu and then go to, let's see, offset curve. And what offset curve does is it basically traces a sort of curve around the curve that you already have at a certain distance. So if you're doing something that requires that, it's absolutely indispensable. It's super useful for a lot of different things. So I think I'm going to actually do it on the outside, because you can see on the inside it has these little intersections. Actually, if you click this trim object, it will get rid of those tiny little intersections. I don't really have a strong feeling about what size this thing should be, so I'm just going to do it like that. Okay, so now we have 2 hexagons, one hexagon kind of inside the other. So that's our wall thickness, basically. And I'm going to select both of those, and then go to the solid menu and do extrude planar curve straight. And of course, I have to find a height for this. So I'm actually going to make it pretty high, because I might actually take it over the top of the room. And this should be fine. Now, I kept the sort of room and the boat thing here for size reference. At this point, it would probably be really useful for me to get rid of them, because then I wouldn't have to think about it, and they won't get in the way. I'm going to just drag this onto the construction curves layer. By the way, you're seeing me sort of like put these curves that I'm kind of finding one at a time, like in the construction curves layer. You can just go to Edit, Select Objects, like select all curves, and just do it all at once. And that's definitely the easiest way to do that. So we have this sort of like this thing here. And I know I said something about poking holes in it and filling it with light. So we'll get there. In order to poke holes in it, we really need something to poke holes with. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a box. I'm going to make it flat and down. So let's see. I'm going to just go ahead and like make an arbitrary box here. I don't want it to, I'm kind of getting in here because I don't want it to be too large. And then I'm just going to give it some arbitrary height. Now, because these are cutting objects, you may notice that I'm designing the box to be far larger than the object that I'm going to cut. And that's because I just want to ensure that it's going to pass through both sides of the object, right? So we're getting there. So I'm going to take this box, and I'm just going to stick it in the center roughly. It's not an exact science. I'm going to stick it roughly in the center of this object. Okay. So at this point, I actually think it would also be advantageous for me to put this on a layer. I'll call it something like hex lamp. And I'm going to move that on there. And get rid of it. And these can probably go back in this construction curves layer. So now what I'm going to do, I know that the bottom of my thing is sort of on the bottom of this, y-axis here. This x-axis is sort of where the bottom is. So I would basically want these holes. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to create a spiral. And then I'm going to take this object, and I'm going to iterate or copy the object into lots and lots of different pieces around this spiral. And then we're going to take this mass of objects, and we're going to subtract it from the hexagon. So in order to do that, we need to make a spiral. So we haven't done that yet. It's over here in the curve menu. And sorry. Strike that, we're actually making a vertical helix. Slight difference. So basically, we want it to start really close to this object, and then it has an end axis. So the end axis would be here. And then you have this, a bunch of options, right? You can choose turns, the pitch. The number of turns is literally how many times it goes around. So I'd like it to be maybe a little bit tighter. So I think maybe 4 sounds good. I don't want to get too crazy. And definitely I want it to be kind of small. So I'm going to just maybe put it there. That looks perfect. Okay, so now it's time to sort of make our mass of stuff on this spiral. So there's a function in Rhino, and I'm going to show you one one example of this function, but there are tons of different ways of doing it. So you can see there's this thing called the array command. So array is basically just a way to copy objects in a regular and predictable way. And so you can make a rectangle that's filled with a grid of objects. You can make a circle that has objects all the way around it in a circle. And today we're going to use the along curve function, which is kind of the fancy one. So basically, I'm just going to click this, and then it says our object is already selected. So it says select path curve. And then it asks for number of items. So you can specify it by number of items, or you can specify it by distance between the items. So in other words, if you know exactly what size the items are, and you know you want 1 inch of space between them, then maybe go with that. In this case, I think we can just go for number of items. And I think I want maybe 30. I don't know. That sounds good. And there it is. So you might be saying, hey, Meg, that's kind of interesting, but it's not very spirally. And I would say, yeah, you're right. I think that this definitely is a little bit chaotic. So we had it in freeform mode, and freeform mode is kind of unpredictable. So let's do it one more time, and I'll show you how to get it to look like how we really want it. So I think what we're asking for, where we have it moving in a spiral along the spiral, is the road-like setting. And you can see that's much more true to what we're dealing with. And so you can see now we basically have this like, these objects that are sort of copied and arranged on a spiral. I just want to, sort of say, side note, the array function, all of the array functions, awesome, really powerful. Yeah, well, let's put our thing in here, our hex lamp. And so now you can see that this is going to definitely intersect a little bit. One thing that I probably would like to do is I would really like to take this whole mess of stuff, and I think I'm actually just going to copy it and rotate it to make it a little bit more dense. So here, I can just find any midpoint here and then set a point. And then really just, I'm totally eyeballing it. So what I was hoping for was to use the copy function in the rotate. After I was done, I was like, where did it go? And so basically, I just want to move it to like a different place where it's not right on top of the other one. So that's probably enough for now. And you can see it's a little bit, that's a little close, but whatever. So now we can bring our hex lamp back. And that's great. When these intersect, I'm just going to take a quick second to maybe like remove the top two because they're sort of like going to leave a like a jagged edge there. So I'm just going to delete a couple of these, and then I'm going to flip it upside down and just get rid of some of these extraneous ones because they're not going to really create any significant amount of light. And I don't know. I'm detail-oriented. I want that to be a flat edge. So that's all great. So basically, what we probably want to do is, what I like to do is I like to use the Boolean 2 objects thing to kind of preview this. So I'm going to grab one object and the hex lamp and do the Boolean 2 objects. And then it says click to iterate through the Boolean results. So we've done this before. Okay, there we go. So, I'm sort of not getting what I want out of this. So I think I'm going to go straight to the Boolean function that I am pretty sure is going to work. So to do that, I'm just going to grab one of these Boolean functions, and I think I'm going to go for the intersection mode. And so it asks me to select a first set of surfaces or polysurfaces, and that would be, whoops, not that. Sorry, do it again. By the way, quick pro tip, did you notice that if you hit enter, it will activate the last command that you used? Which if you're doing something like repeatedly, is super helpful. So anyway, here, first set of polysurfaces. So if you're really having trouble with this, you can certainly turn off one of these layers. I'm actually just going to zoom in so I'm sort of like not hitting that top bit there. There we go. Okay. And then I'm basically going to sort of select all of these pieces. And it can be a little tricky. It probably would have been a nice idea for me to have grouped these ahead of time. I didn't, so it just makes a couple more clicks. It's not like the end of the world. So this is actually the exact opposite of what we wanted, and this is one of the reasons why I try to preview stuff in the Boolean two objects. It just didn't seem to be working all that well. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and use the other Boolean mode, which would be difference. So we're going to try that. And it should be, oh, for God's sake, just loves to select that top piece. Okay, so this is automatically my first sort of piece, and then now we're sort of subtracting with these, and I can just kind of add these in. Alrighty. Boolean difference failed. That is so unfortunate. So a couple of things that we could probably do to help that. I'm just going to double check and make sure that there's nothing crazy happening. So I have a feeling that the reason our Boolean difference failed is because these pieces are so close to each other that Rhino is getting confused by this geometry. So I'm going to go back a couple of several. There we go. Okay, so now we're back down to just one set. And I'm just going to try this whole thing again, just with one set. And then you can also kind of subtract these like a set at a time, rather than trying to do all two sets at once, which is kind of ambitious, I mean, I have to say. So go to difference, and then we'll select this sort of first set here. We might have to sort of like move on after I get this done, just because I have other stuff that I want to talk about. But now you can see that basically this is what we get, right? It's this sort of object with holes in it. And you know, I think personally that it would be really cool to like maybe twist these objects with holes, but we're not quite, we might get to that maybe next time. For now, we can kind of just work with it as it is. So if I bring back the room and I bring back the boat, I did promise that we would start doing lighting today. And so we have sort of 3 more class sessions with Rhino. We've got plenty of time to deal with lighting, but I do want to at least get started with it today. So basically, like, one thing I'm just going to do quickly before we light this stuff is I'm going to move some objects into place. So I'm just going to rotate my view here so I can kind of see what's going on. And this lamp looks a bit large. We might scale it down a bit. That's no big deal. A couple of things. I want to take the sort of boat, and I'd like to sort of rotate it so that it's pointed towards the corner. So now that the room is locked, we can kind of do that without any issues. So I'm just going to go to the rotate command. And actually, before I do go to the rotate command, I think it would be really helpful to go ahead and group the boat if it isn't already grouped. So let me see what's happening there. It looks like I have it locked. Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to select it and group it. Particularly when you get into the phase where you're working on lighting and materials, it's really helpful to group stuff because that's mostly how you're dealing with things. So I'm going to select this object, and I'm just going to rotate it like 45 degrees. And of course, we're in copy mode right now, so didn't see that. So I'm just going to move this back like a tiny bit. And then this one we could just get rid of. And then, of course, we have our extremely large lamp. Probably this spiral. Do we need it? Do we not need it? I'm going to save it because I might actually add some objects to this scene in between now and next class so that we have more options for materials. They will be objects that you won't, trust me, you won't miss anything. So yeah, here I'm going to stick this on this layer. And we'll go ahead and move this down there. So yeah, wow, that's big. Okay, so saying that that's big is, you know, one thing, and actually scaling it is another. So in order to scale it, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the scale function, and I'm going to scale from the bottom. That's just kind of a habit that I have when I'm working in Rhino. And so this is that. And here we go. So when you start to get into lighting and materials in Rhino, a couple of things can happen. One, your project can start to look awesome, and that's good. Two, it can be a lot more demanding on your computer as you sort of work with those things. So I'm probably going to give you like multiple sort of messages and tips about sort of working with lights and materials and sort of like a computer that is like, oh, I'm dying. So it happens. So here, I can tell you right now, like at this point in the process, if we're sort of done like drawing stuff and we want to start doing lights and materials, at this point in the process, this view kind of stops working for us because it's not going to show us what we need to know. It's not going to show us lights. It's not going to show us materials. So first of all, I'm going to change the view on the perspective view and put it into the actual rendered view. And in the rendered view, you're going to start to see things a little bit differently. So it looks like a couple of things are happening here. It looks like we've got one little curve stuck here. So real quickly, I'm just going to clean that up by going to Edit, Select Objects, Curves, and dump that in here. And then, let's see. Okay, so now you can see like our scene is starting to look a little bit more realistic. I'm actually going to move this sort of lamp object to maybe be a little bit closer to our boat object. But I don't want it to block the boat object, so we'll figure it out. It will probably end up living somewhere else. So, okay, so let's talk about lighting. I mean, I can certainly take the perspective view and get it kind of oriented the way I want or the way I expect. You may be asking, is this object going to be part of the scene or not? I'm not really sure. I can guarantee you that when we put light in it, it'll be part of the scene, whether we actually see it on, see the lamp itself or if we just see the light that comes out of it. So let's go ahead now and start thinking about lighting the boat. And so lights in Rhino are all sort of right here in this sort of yellow cone-looking thing. And you can see if you kind of, press it down, there's a significant number of lights, different types of lights. Probably the light that you might want to, if you're looking for something to look normal, and I use that word lightly, you probably want a directional light. And so let me just show you real quickly what the directional light does. You basically sort of just draw the direction that the light goes in, and then the light goes in that direction. So with a directional light, it's great for like, if you are just lighting like a living room or something that has kind of normal lighting, or like a room like this actually would probably be a great room for directional lighting. You can also have more than one directional light. So if we go ahead and just make another directional light, maybe like going in this direction, so they're sort of crossing a little bit, you'll get sort of maybe a little bit of a better effect. Now, I want to talk to you about just a couple of things about render settings. So if we go to the render settings, which I think we should at this point before we get too far down the rabbit hole with lighting, it's important to realize that Rhino kind of comes with its own light, which is called a skylight. And it's basically like a really diffuse, generic light that, shocker, looks like it's coming from the sky. So if you're looking for sort of like default lighting, it's okay, but it's like the most boring thing you could do. So we're going to go into the render settings and just make sure that our skylight is turned off before we move forward. And you'll see how drastically it changes the way that the user-created lights look. So we're not going to get too into the render settings. I'm not going to bother you with that stuff now. We'll talk about that later. But over here where it says lighting, you probably, unless you're using some environment where you want really kind of diffuse, kind of blah lighting, you should probably turn the skylight off. The skylight is good for doing quick renderings or quick tests where you just need something to look like something, you know? But if you want something that's sort of like artistic, probably the skylight is not the option. So I'm going to turn it off. And you'll see really quickly, like, oh my goodness, we're in a whole different world, right? That's because just like I was saying just a couple seconds ago, like the skylight is really like diffuse all over lighting, like it just kind of fills the room with light. Where with the directional light, you're really asking it to, I'm gonna just select this, you're really asking it to, hold light. So here, and this is now, we're seeing this rendered view, and it's only showing these two directional lights. So a couple of things that you might want to remark about the directional lights. There's not really like a lot of adjustment that you can do on the directional lights. You can adjust the intensity down, and you can adjust the shadow intensity down. Of course, we have another light that is also sort of has those high settings. So, you can play with these settings to your heart's content. Now, that being said, for this scene, I don't think I'm going to use directional lights. I just kind of wanted to show you how they work because you might want to use them for your scene. My sort of personal favorite for lighting in Rhino is the spotlight because you get a little bit more flexibility and it just looks better, honestly. So let's try some spotlights. So I'll make a spotlight. Create spotlight is right there. And what you need to do with a spotlight, it's a little bit different. Instead of making a vector, you do actually make a vector or a direction, but first you make a cone. And I like if I'm lighting a room, I like my spotlights to be big. Big. So this is like where I want the light to fall, okay? That's basically the base of the cone is what you would think about if you're like, yeah, that's pretty much what I want lit. And then after you select the base of the cone, you basically have to move out and pick a direction. Now, if you don't find the direction that you exactly want, or your heart desires, don't worry, because you can totally rotate these lights and move them and do all kinds of stuff after the fact. So usually I just kind of pick the distance that I want the light from. So if they put the light like right here, it's going to be like, oh my God, the police are interrogating me. If you put the light back here, it's going to be like, oh, maybe I'll sing a song. So I try to put the light a little further back. Now, we're not done kind of playing with this. So here, I'm going to select it, and then you can see the sort of adjustments that you get. You can also see that just right away, the quality of the light is a little smoother, is a little nicer, So that's one of the reasons why I like spotlights. And then there's an intensity setting. If you only have one light in the scene, you probably want the intensity set to 0. If we add another light and we have 2 lights with an intensity set to 1, we can actually do that next. It's going to burn your eyes. It's just going to be crazy amount of light. So usually when I have multiple lights, I actually divide the number of lights I have by 1. And then, if I've got 2, I'll do each at 50%. Obviously if you want one to be lower, then that's different. So here, I'm going to leave the shadow intensity where it is. I'm also going to leave the intensity where it is for now. I'm going to play around with the hardness a little bit, just because one of the things I really like about spotlights is the fact that you can kind of make them a little bit soft. And so now I can take this spotlight. I probably, ideally, would like to maybe rotate this spotlight a little bit So one thing you can do is you can grab just this point on the end and you can kind of pull it towards where you want it. And so this is pretty close to perfect. I don't usually use that word, but there it is. And I'm actually going to put this one maybe over here, or well, maybe over here. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this into another one, and I'm just going to whoop, free sound effects. And so now, basically what I have when I have those two lights is I have a much more sort of like nuanced kind of shadow profile. Let's zoom in on this object so you can kind of see what that looks like. And of course, play around with this on your own time. But yeah, so now when I zoom in on this, it's going to look a lot nicer. And you can see we don't have like any really harsh shadows, but there's definitely shadows there. And yeah, when we get further into the materials, this will be even more interesting. So last thing I want to do is I want to stick some light in here, and we'll get sort of that nice effect. So I'm actually going to just escape. And so in order to stick a light in here, I'm going to stick multiple lights in here. I'm going to use a point light. And a point light is exactly what it sounds like. It's literally a point with light coming out at like 360 degrees, like from everywhere. So point lights are great for sticking in stuff. Point lights are also nice, like if you want to set them very low, at a very low intensity and maybe have them look like Christmas lights or something like that. You could do that. So point lights, mostly I use point lights to add to objects. So obviously, like I'm not going to find a way to kind of place this in here like right away. So I can definitely use probably actually the gumball would be a great thing to use in this case. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm just trying to kind of get it placed in the right, sorry, accidentally selected that. I just want to get this sort of stuck in the center of the object. And it's almost disco time here. And then I'm going to move it up a tiny bit. And then I'm going to cut and paste it. And I'm just going to make 3 of these. So yeah, one of my favorite things to do when I'm 3D modeling is to play around with light. I just think it's really fun. And yeah, you get some really crazy results. So one of the things we might do is we might probably just group this whole thing because when I have something like this, like it's probably a good opportunity to like just move it around the scene and see what happens. And then, of course, we can always come back. Probably, I think, next class, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and twist this thing. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about materials. So one of the things that I'm going to do with materials, I was thinking that we could make the narwhal horn mast thing gold. I'm going to make the wings sort of transparent. And then we're going to assign sort of like wood slats to the boat. And then, of course, don't forget about the room. We're going to put, some materials on the room, too. And then, yeah, we'll just go from there. So enjoy. Enjoy your weekend, also. It's coming, don't worry. Not quite there yet, but almost there. I'll see y'all later.